Part 1. The Invention. Dr. Eliza Quark stood before her creation, a tangle of wires and blinking lights that filled her basement laboratory. The air hummed with electricity and anticipation. She wiped her palms on her lab coat, leaving smudges of grease and excitement. The scent of ozone and soldered circuits hung heavy in the air, a testament to countless hours of work. "This is it," she muttered to herself, her voice barely audible over the machine's soft whir. The culmination of a decade's work. The paradox machine. Eliza had always been fascinated by the concept of foreknowledge. As a child, she devoured every time travel story she could find, pondering the implications of knowing the future. Her bedroom walls had been plastered with posters of Einstein and Hawking, her bookshelves groaning under the weight of quantum physics textbooks most adults would find impenetrable. Now, at 35, she believed she had cracked the code. The journey hadn't been easy. She'd sacrificed her social life, strained relationships with family and friends, and poured every cent of her inheritance into this project. But standing here, on the precipice of a breakthrough that could change the course of human history, it all seemed worth it. The paradox machine was designed to answer any yes or no question about the future with perfect accuracy. It tapped into quantum fluctuations, analyzed probability waves, and did 100 other things that Eliza herself didn't fully understand. The theory behind it was a mix of quantum mechanics, chaos theory, and some principles she developed herself that she was sure would revolutionize physics. If they worked. The quantum entanglement should allow for non-local correlations across time, she mused, running a hand through her unkempt hair. And the probability matrix. Well, that's where the magic happens. She took a deep breath and approached the input terminal. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The weight of the moment pressed down on her. This could be it, the defining moment of her career, of her life. Start simple, she told herself, her voice echoing in the cavernous lab. Something easy to verify, she typed. Will it rain tomorrow? The machine hummed louder for a moment, its lights flashing in complex patterns. Eliza watched, fascinated, as data scrolled across several monitors. Atmospheric pressure readings, temperature gradients, wind patterns. The machine seemed to be analyzing it all in real time. Then a single word appeared on the main screen. Yes. Eliza checked her weather app. Clear skies were forecast for the next week. Her heart raced. Could it be? Had she done it? We'll see, she murmured, allowing herself a small smile. The real test would come tomorrow. Emboldened by this first attempt, she decided to try something a bit more complex. She typed, "Will the stock market close higher tomorrow than it did today?" Another brief light show ensued, more intense this time. The machine's cooling fans kicked into high gear, and for a moment Eliza worried it might overheat. But then the answer appeared. No. She made a mental note to check that one too. If both predictions proved accurate, it would be, well, revolutionary wouldn't begin to cover it. Eliza's heart raced as she contemplated her next question. The possibilities were endless. She could predict election outcomes, natural disasters, scientific breakthroughs. The fate of the world could be at her fingertips. The power was intoxicating, and for a moment, she felt dizzy with the implications. But first, she needed to be sure. She needed to test the machine's limits. And there was one question that had been nagging at her since she first conceived of this project, a question that spoke to the very heart of causality and free will. With trembling fingers, she typed, "Will I destroy this machine tomorrow?" The paradox machine's hum grew to a roar. Lights flashed erratically, faster and brighter than before. Eliza stepped back, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and scientific curiosity. The temperature in the room seemed to spike, and she could smell something burning. On the screen, letters began to appear, one by one. Yea, before the answer could complete, a loud pop echoed through the lab. Sparks flew from the machine's core. Smoke began to rise from its circuitry, acrid and thick. Eliza lunged for the fire extinguisher, but before she could reach it, the paradox machine went dark. The hum died away, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. She stared at her creation, her mind racing. Had it worked? Had it failed? Or had it done exactly what it was supposed to do? The question she'd asked was a paradox in itself. If the machine said yes, and she chose not to destroy it, would that make the machine wrong? And if it said no, and she destroyed it because of that answer, wouldn't that also make it wrong? As the smoke cleared, Eliza realized that this was only the beginning. The paradox machine had answered her question in the most unexpected way possible. And in doing so, it had opened up a whole new realm of possibilities and dangers. Little did she know, her real adventure was about to begin. The line between knowledge and chaos, she would soon learn, was far thinner than she had ever imagined. Part 2. The Aftermath. The next morning, Eliza awoke with a start, her heart pounding. For a moment, she thought the events of the previous night had been a dream. But the acrid smell of burnt circuitry that still lingered in her hair told her otherwise. Reality came crashing back, and with it, a mixture of excitement and dread. She threw off her covers and rushed down to her lab, taking the stairs two at a time. Her bare feet slapped against the cold concrete floor as she burst into the room. The paradox machine sat where she'd left it, a silent monolith of metal and melted plastic. In the harsh light of day, it looked less like a revolutionary invention and more like a very expensive paperweight. Eliza approached it cautiously, as if it might spring to life at any moment. She examined the damage, her heart sinking with each scorched component she uncovered. The main processor was fried. The quantum entanglement module was a mess of melted silicon, and the probability matrix. Well, it was anybody's guess what had happened to that. "What have you done?" she murmured, more to herself than to the machine. Her fingers traced the edge of a burnt-out circuit board, coming away black with soot. As she sifted through the wreckage, her mind raced. The machine had predicted its own destruction, or had it? It hadn't finished its answer. Was that a limitation of the machine, or a feature? Had it destroyed itself to prevent a paradox, or had it simply malfunctioned? The questions piled up faster than the burnt-out circuits she was cataloging. But one thing was clear. She needed to rebuild it. The potential was too great, the implications too vast to give up now. Just then, her phone buzzed. A news alert. Unexpected downpour causes flash floods. Eliza's eyes widened. She scrambled to check yesterday's stock market closing figures against today's opening. Sure enough, they were down. It worked. She whispered, a mixture of awe and fear in her voice. It really worked. The realization hit her like a physical force. Her machine hadn't just made lucky guesses, it had accurately predicted the future. The implications were staggering. With a functioning paradox machine, she could revolutionize every field of human endeavor. Weather prediction, economic forecasting, disaster prevention. The possibilities were endless. But with that potential came an enormous responsibility. If she could know the future, did she have an obligation to act on that knowledge? And what if her actions changed the very future she had foreseen? One step at a time, Eliza, she told herself, taking a deep breath to calm her racing thoughts. First, you need to rebuild it. With renewed determination, Eliza set about recreating her invention. She worked tirelessly, pausing only for coffee and the occasional power nap. Days blended into nights, and nights into days. The outside world faded away as she lost herself in the intricate dance of quantum mechanics and probability matrices. As she worked, strange things began to happen. She'd reach for a tool, only to find it already in her hand. She'd hit a roadblock in her calculations, only to find the solution scribbled in her own handwriting in the margins of her notes she didn't remember taking. It was as if some future version of herself was reaching back through time, guiding her work. The implications made her head spin, but she pressed on. If her future self was helping her, didn't that mean she would succeed? But if I succeed because my future self helps me, she mused aloud one night, her voice echoing in the empty lab, then how did I succeed the first time without help? Unless there was no first time. Unless it's all happening simultaneously, across multiple timelines. She shook her head, trying to clear it. The nature of time and causality had always been complex, but now it felt like she was trying to untangle a knot that existed in 4 dimensions. Finally, after what felt like both an eternity and no time at all, the new paradox machine stood before her. It was sleeker than its predecessor, more elegant in its design. Eliza had learned from her mistakes, or perhaps, she mused, from her future successes. This new version incorporated fail-safes she hadn't considered before, and used materials she could have sworn hadn't been invented yet. Had she invented them herself? Or had that knowledge, too, come from some future version of herself? She stood before the input terminal once again, her finger hovering over the enter key. The question she'd typed seemed to glow on the screen. Will activating this machine change the course of human history? Eliza hesitated. The weight of potential consequences pressed down on her. Was she opening Pandora's box? Was she about to become the savior of humanity or its downfall? In that moment of hesitation, she failed to notice the small, blinking light on the machine's panel. A light that hadn't been there in her original design. A light that seemed to pulse in sync with her own racing heartbeat. As her finger descended toward the key, the air in the lab seemed to thicken. The machine hummed to life, its circuits glowing with an otherworldly energy. And somewhere, in the quantum realm that the paradox machine tapped into, the very fabric of reality held its breath. Eliza Quark was about to learn that some questions, once asked, can never be unanswered. And some answers come at a price higher than anyone could imagine. The boundary between knowledge and chaos was about to be erased, and Eliza stood at the epicenter of a temporal storm that threatened to engulf not just her, but the entire world. Part 3. The Ripple Effect. The moment Eliza's finger made contact with the enter key, the world around her exploded into chaos. The paradox machine erupted in a brilliant flash of light, momentarily blinding her. The air crackled with energy, and Eliza felt a sensation like static electricity dancing across her skin. When her vision cleared, she found herself still standing in her lab, but everything was different. The walls seemed to shimmer and shift, as if unable to decide on their final form. Objects appeared and disappeared at random, a beaker here 1 second, gone the next, replaced by a potted plant that hadn't been there before. The laws of physics themselves seemed to be in flux, with gravity alternating between too strong and non-existent. Eliza stumbled backwards, her mind reeling. What's happening? She gasped, though there was no one to hear her. The very air seemed to vibrate with potentiality, as if a million possible realities were trying to coexist in the same space. As if in response to her question, the machine's screen flickered to life. Words began to scroll across it, faster than she could read. Snippets jumped out at her. World War III averted, cure for cancer discovered in 2027, first contact with alien life in 2035, global warming reversed by 2040, humanity achieves immortality in 2052, Earth destroyed by asteroid in 2073. Time travel perfected in 2109. Eliza's eyes widened as she realized what she was seeing. The machine wasn't just predicting the future, it was showing her all possible futures, all at once. And somehow, impossibly, it was making them all real. She staggered to her computer, desperate to understand what was happening outside her lab. The internet was a maze of contradictions. News sites reported events that were immediately contradicted or erased. Social media was a storm of confusion, with people sharing memories of lives they'd never lived and histories that had never happened. As Eliza watched, helpless, she saw the ripple effect of her actions spreading across the globe. Every decision ever made was being unmade and remade. Every possibility was becoming reality, all at the same time. In Beijing, a man woke up to find himself president of a country that no longer existed. In New York, a woman stepped out of her apartment into a sprawling forest. In the middle of the Pacific, an island appeared and disappeared and appeared again, its inhabitants living lifetimes in the blink of an eye. The fabric of reality was unraveling, and Eliza knew it was all her fault. "I've got to shut it down," she muttered, turning back to the paradox machine. But as she reached for the power switch, she froze. In the swirling chaos of the lab, she saw something impossible herself. But this other Eliza was older, her hair streaked with gray, her eyes carrying the weight of countless realities. The older Eliza smiled sadly and shook her head. "It's not that simple," her older self said, her voice echoing strangely, as if coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Shutting it down won't undo what's been done. The paradoxes have already been set in motion." Eliza's mind raced, trying to comprehend what she was seeing. But how are you here? How is any of this possible? Her older self gestured at the chaos surrounding them. In this moment, all possibilities exist simultaneously. I'm here because in one possible future, I figured out how to navigate the paradoxes. But that future is just one of infinite possibilities. Desperation clawing at her throat, Eliza turned back to the paradox machine. "How do I stop this?" She shouted at it, her voice cracking. The machine, as if sensing her distress, stopped its frantic display. A single line of text appeared on the screen. "You already have." Before Eliza could process what this meant, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She spun around, coming face to face with her older self again. "It's time," the older Eliza said, her voice gentle but firm. "Time for what?" Eliza asked, her mind struggling to comprehend what she was seeing. "To make the choice that preserves the timeline," her older self replied. "The choice I made. The choice we always make. Double quotes. As if in a trance, Eliza found herself reaching for the machine. Her hand hovered over a big red button. She didn't remember installing a failsafe of sorts. But all those futures, Eliza whispered, thinking of the cancer cure, the averted wars, the saved planet. How can we give that up? Her older self smiled sadly. Because the cost is too high. Because humanity must make its own choices, forge its own path. Because this is the way it has always been, and always will be. I don't understand, Eliza said, her hand still hovering over the button. You will, her older self assured her. In time, you'll understand that the greatest paradox of all is free will. The future isn't set, Eliza. It's a tapestry of possibilities, woven by the choices we make. By trying to know it all, to control it all, we risk unraveling everything. Eliza looked around at the chaos of shifting realities, at the endless stream of futures flickering across the machine's screen. She thought of the responsibility she had taken upon herself, the enormity of the knowledge she had unleashed. But if I press this button, Eliza said, her voice barely a whisper, won't I be making the choice for everyone? Isn't that exactly what we're trying to avoid? Her older self nodded, a glimmer of approval in her eyes. That's the paradox within the paradox, isn't it? But consider this: by choosing not to choose, by allowing all possibilities to exist simultaneously, we're denying humanity the very thing that makes us human, the ability to shape our own destiny. As if to emphasize her point, a new series of images flashed across the paradox machine's screen. Humanity stagnates, paralyzed by infinite choice. Free will becomes an illusion as all decisions happen at once. The concept of progress loses meaning in a world of simultaneous outcomes. Eliza felt a chill run down her spine. The implications were staggering. In trying to know and control the future, she had inadvertently created a reality where the future, and indeed, the very concept of time itself, had lost all meaning. "Okay," Eliza said, taking a deep breath. "I think I understand. But what happens when I press the button? Will all of this just disappear?" Her older self shook her head. "Not exactly. The paradoxes will resolve themselves. Reality will settle back into a single timeline. Most people won't remember any of this. It'll be like waking up from a dream they can't quite recall. But I will remember," Eliza said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," her older self confirmed. "That's part of the paradox, too. You'll remember so that you can make this choice again when the time comes. It's a loop, Eliza. A loop that preserves free will by constantly reaffirming the choice to allow an unknown future." Eliza closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and pressed the button. The world went white. When Eliza opened her eyes again, she was alone in her lab. The paradox machine stood before her, silent and dark. On its screen, a single question glowed. Will activating this machine change the course of human history? Her finger hovered over the enter key, trembling slightly. In that moment, Eliza understood. She understood the weight of knowledge, the responsibility of power, and the paradox of choice. With a sad smile, she reached for the big red button instead. Some questions, she realized, were better left unanswered. Some futures were better left unwritten. And some paradoxes could only be resolved by embracing the mystery of the unknown. As she pressed the button, Eliza felt a sense of déjà vu. Had she done this before? Would she do it again? In the end, she supposed, it didn't matter. The only future that truly mattered was the one yet to be written. And that future, she now knew, belonged not to machines or predictions, but to the messy, beautiful, unpredictable chaos of human choice. The paradox machine powered down for the last time, taking with it the weight of infinite futures. And Eliza Quark, no longer a prisoner of what might be, found herself facing the most exciting prospect of all, a future unknown. Part 4. The Resolution. The paradox machine died with a whimper, not a bang. As Eliza's finger left the big red button, the lights flickered and faded, the hum of power winding down to silence. She stood there, hand still outstretched, as the weight of what she'd done and what she'd prevented settled over her like a heavy blanket. For a long moment, the only sound in the lab was her own breathing, ragged and uneven. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, she lowered her hand and stepped back from the machine. "It's over," she whispered to the empty room. But was it? The memory of her older self, of countless realities collapsing and reforming, still burned bright in her mind. Had that really happened? Or was it some kind of hallucination, a vivid dream born from too many late nights and too much caffeine? Eliza ran her hands through her hair, her mind racing. She needed to be sure. She needed to know if she'd truly changed anything, or if the world outside her lab remained blissfully unaware of how close it had come to. What? Destruction? Salvation? She wasn't sure anymore. With trembling hands, she reached for her phone. No alerts about sudden weather changes or stock market crashes. She flipped on the TV. No reports of miraculous cures or averted wars. Everything seemed normal. A hysterical laugh bubbled up from her chest. Normal. After what she'd just experienced, normal felt like the most alien concept in the universe. As the adrenaline began to fade, exhaustion crept in. Eliza slumped into her chair, her eyes drawn back to the now-defunct paradox machine. All those years of work, all those sleepless nights and sacrificed relationships, and what did she have to show for it? A heap of useless circuitry and a head full of memories that may or may not be real. But as she sat there, staring at her failed creation, something began to shift in her perspective. She'd set out to build a machine that could predict the future, but in doing so, she'd lost sight of what really mattered: the present. The future, she realized, wasn't something to be known or controlled. It was something to be shaped, moment by moment, through the choices we make and the actions we take. The real paradox wasn't in the machine, but in the very idea that knowing the future could somehow improve it. "We're not meant to know everything," she murmured, running her hand along the cool metal of the machine. "The uncertainty. That's what makes life worth living." With a newfound sense of purpose, Eliza stood up. She walked to her workbench, picked up a screwdriver, and began to dismantle the paradox machine. But this time, she wasn't driven by the feverish need to rebuild or improve. Instead, she felt a sense of liberation with each component she removed. As she worked, she began to plan. Not for some grand, world-changing invention, but for smaller, more tangible goals. She'd call her parents, whom she'd been neglecting. She'd take the cooking class she'd always been curious about. Maybe she'd even ask out that cute barista at her local coffee shop. Time to start living in the present, she told herself, a small smile playing on her lips. Hours passed, and finally, the last screw was removed. The paradox machine was no more. In its place was a pile of parts that could be repurposed, reimagined, reborn into something new. Eliza surveyed her handiwork with a smile. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She walked out of her lab, climbed the stairs to the main floor of her house, and stepped outside. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. A warm breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers. In the distance, she could hear children laughing, dogs barking, the ordinary symphony of life going on all around her. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Eliza didn't try to calculate probabilities or predict outcomes. She simply stood there, breathing in the moment, fully present in a world of infinite possibilities. An elderly neighbor, out for an evening stroll, waved at her. Eliza waved back, realizing with a start that she didn't even know the woman's name. "Hi there," Eliza called out, her voice rusty from disuse. "I'm Eliza. I don't think we've properly met." The old woman's face lit up with a warm smile. "Well, hello, Eliza. I'm Margaret. It's nice to finally meet you. We were starting to think you were a ghost, always cooped up in that house." Eliza laughed, a genuine, heartfelt sound that surprised her. "No, not a ghost. Just lost in my work, I suppose. But I'm trying to change that." "Well, dear," Margaret said, her eyes twinkling, "it's never too late to start living. You know, we have a neighborhood barbecue every Sunday. You should join us sometime." "I'd like that," Eliza replied, and was surprised to find she meant it. As twilight deepened into night, a shooting star streaked across the sky. Eliza closed her eyes and made a wish. Not for knowledge of the future, but for the wisdom to make the most of the present. When she opened her eyes again, she felt at peace. The future was unknown, uncertain, and that was exactly as it should be. After all, she mused as she turned to go back inside, isn't that what makes life worth living? Behind her, unnoticed, a small light blinked once on the remains of the paradox machine. Then, with a final, almost contented sigh, it went dark for good. The paradox was resolved. The future, unwritten. And Eliza Quark, no longer a prisoner of what might be, was finally free to explore what is. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Eliza's dreams were not of quantum mechanics or probability matrices, but of Sunday barbecues, cooking classes, and the smile of a certain barista. The future, she realized, was not something to be predicted, but something to be lived. And for the first time in years, Dr. Eliza Quark was looking forward to tomorrow, not because she knew what it would bring, but precisely because she didn't.